It's no secret that Destiny 2 has been in a tough spot ever since the conclusion of the final shape. While I'm not going to be discussing the reasons behind that in this video, it's clear that both the player counts and the player sentiment have tumbled pretty significantly. The shift from seasons to episodes has been far from a hit with the majority of the Destiny community. However, Bungie always has an ace up its sleeve. Raids, dungeons, and the world's first races they come with are by far and away the best content that Bungie creates. Regardless of the game's state, raid and dungeon races manage to clear the schedules of thousands of Guardians who are eager to watch and play the pinnacle of Destiny content. And this was no different with the release of Bungie's newest dungeon, Sundered Doctrine. However, Sundered Doctrine managed to do things that no dungeon and very few raids have ever managed to do. And today, we discuss the good and the bad, the timeline of how World's First was conquered, and the inevitable shockwaves the dungeon will send through the entire community. The story of Sundered Doctrine truly begins before the dungeon was actually released, with controversy spreading through the community surrounding the world's first race. Many players and viewers in the community had become incredibly frustrated during earlier World's First events when leading racers began obstructing their streams, as a way of preventing people from spying on their encounter strategies and theories. At first, this started with teams occasionally muting and then fully muting audible stream mics to hide discussions. However, things would really come to a head when teams began to fully hide both their screen and comms during the Verity and the Witness encounter of the Salvation's Edge World's First raid, in turn completely destroying the viewing experience.
People were saying they could see that Dado got to DPS in his glasses. That is
no,
copious.
that is cap.
That
no.
is copious.
Yeah.
On one hand, it's really easy to sympathize with racers who choose to do this. Bungie's World's First races have been scaling up in size over time, with the prizes and the incentives to win getting bigger too. Destiny has also always struggled to scratch the competitive itch in its community, and these racers are really the only official way for those to prove their Destiny prowess, and therefore it makes sense why leading teams would choose to limit the advantage they offer to other competitors, especially in a scenario like a puzzle. However, on the other hand, World's First races are the spectacle they are purely down to the viewers who choose to tune in and care. The hype only exists as tens of thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands of people eagerly watch Destiny's best players navigate through intricate puzzles and tanky bosses. Teams stream their runs as a way to capitalize on this increased hype, whether it be for the monetary reasons or pure bragging rights, and sacrificing some competitive edge seems to be a suitable compromise if you're wanting to capitalize on the hype. After all, no one is forced to stream to begin with. Ultimately, the argument is much longer than the points I've listed above. No side of the argument is flawless, and you're welcome to discuss it further below. However, the discussion would play an interesting role come the finale of Sundered Doctrine. To credit Bungie, the dungeon launched smoothly and relatively error code free at the intended time. Racers were thrown onto a familiar looking ship, and they instantly began to traverse through the vast surroundings. Parts of the community were understandably hesitant about the dungeon's reused look, and what this might mean for the effort placed into the gameplay, with it being very visually reminiscent to both Vow of the Disciple and much of the final shape content. Racers were instantly met with Savathun's narration, however, and her role as the hive god of trickery made it clear that this would be no pushover, and alluded to the intense puzzly nature of this dungeon. The trickery began before the first encounter even started. A deceptive traversal through the vast city-like ship stood between players and the first rally flag, requiring players to look high, low, and even behind waterfalls to route forward. The Doctrine's playful trickery here meant that it took some teams up to 15 minutes to reach encounter 1.
Okay, that is not it. Look around.
Upon reaching the first encounter, all racers and us over at Dungeon Zone had a massive "oh" moment.
And we're seeing Tides has already found what looks like, that kind of looks like the trophy. That looks like the trophy.
Whoa. Wait.
Is that not the trophy?
Wait.
That's the trophy.
The community had been confused about the shape of the newly introduced dungeon trophy, but once we saw the peculiar shaped object, it made sense. Racers quickly realized the lenses acted just as a lens does in real life, directing and focusing light in a specific direction, with the interactable lens stands around the area being the method in which players would use to change the direction of the beam. What this beam was used for was yet to be discovered, however. This will also remind a lot lot of Zelda players of a special time in various dungeons in the franchise's history. The inclusion of the enrage timer from the encounter start added stress to teams trying to make sense of the encounter. We saw a similar wipe timer in the Salvation's Edge raid, and its inclusion in Sundered Doctrine is equally as cool. In this dungeon, racers would have to solve a riddle before the timer wiped them, and Data would be the very first to give us a tiny insight into this, showcasing the return of the infamous vow symbols, and further confirming that the community would need to dust off their finest puzzle-solving hats for the Sundered Doctrine. Vendetta would be the first player we tracked to make significant progress on this step, realizing that the light beams could be extended via the lenses all the way to the middle symbol of the wheel, and it then made logical sense that matches would need to be made between the symbols dropped by the Truthbearer. Vendetta is a seriously strong Destiny player, and no stranger to a world's first race, being one of only 12 players to complete the 24-hour Last Wish raid race, and officially taking world's second, then following up with a world's first in Scourge of the Past. Almost 7 years later, he is still showing this prowess, being the first we tracked to reach the final rotation on Encounter 1, 37 minutes in, falling just short via one of the most unfortunate day one moments you will ever see.
2 seconds. Whoa, oh, he grabbed the relic! No! No!
That's
oh,
like,
he grabbed the relic!
I know. That's like that classic where everybody's done it before.
Just 4 minutes after this, A-Tides and Team Indebted appeared to be the first team to solve the riddle and clear Encounter 1. Over the next 30 minutes, an array of other completions began to tumble in, and it was time for teams to explore what other trickery the Sundered Doctrine had in store for players. Once again, the trickery extended into the in-between encounter traversal areas too, with a spooky maze and Indiana Jones spike ball trap standing between the players and the second encounter. Amongst the hype of an encounter completion, the incredible design of traversal areas can often be lost on players. They may get frustrating to cross on repeat playthroughs, but while they are still fresh, traversal areas play a vital role in setting the tone and atmosphere of a dungeon. They are truly an underappreciated part of most dungeons and raids, and separate Destiny into a class of its own on the endgame's content. 50 minutes into the race, and A-Tides gave us the first look at Encounter 2 and its weird darkness shrinker things. This boss is where we would see a huge stumbling block for the community. Dungeons and raids are quite different, with dungeons typically featuring a simple, central mechanic that develops throughout the mission, and raids having multiple complex mechanics that vary throughout. Bungie really flipped the switch for Sundered Doctrine, however, and not only were the mechanics more than raid worthy, but this style of mechanic design had never been seen in Destiny before. Teams figured out how to reach the damage phase fairly quickly, but struggled to deal any meaningful damage, and it was clear everyone was missing something. Racers spent significant time just chatting and theory crafting to diagnose where things were going wrong, but no one could pin down the true reason. Almost an hour after reaching the encounter, ATP's team was the first we saw to finally crack the puzzle and deal some meaningful damage.
80k, 106k?
Yeah, I mean,
all right.
So this is clearly, I mean, they kind of
111, 111.
This is by far the most damage we've seen here. So we're gonna keep this.
Wow,
this
snipers
right
at the
here.
end too.
Yep.
Oh,
Beautiful damage here.
Despite this huge first damage rotation, his team were unable to close out the encounter, and their wipe meant that as the second hour mark was reached, only the first encounter had been beaten. So how was it cracked? The reason behind the struggle was purely down to Bungie's incredibly innovative mechanic design. With the design of the architecture and the inclusion of the vow symbols, the Doctrine lured players in with familiar surroundings. However, the mechanic utilizes the symbols in a way that Destiny had never seen. Previously in Destiny, symbols had purely acted as a visual entity with no real meaning behind them, so much so that in some raids, different teams and different communities would have different names for the same symbols. In this dungeon, however, knowing the correct names for all of the symbols would be vital, as for the very first time, the names of the symbols acted as almost instructions for the player, transcending the symbols past being a purely visual thing. The encounter acted almost like a game show, allowing racers to input resonance to rotate a wheel, changing the symbol that glowed and therefore the symbol that was active. Players learned that the gameplay of the fight would change depending on the active symbol. Stop symbols stopped ads spawning. Commune symbols spawned bees. Hive symbols spawned ogres, racers and ads. Brain symbols spawn knights and wizards, while most importantly, the kill symbol on the leftmost wheel allowed players to start DPS. Bungie allowing players to dictate the way they played the encounter is incredibly innovative and truly fantastic dungeon design that also made for great world's first viewing, as teams frantically tried to uncover a mechanic that we had never seen before. Although, even after the mechanic was solved, teams were not entirely out of the woods. After all, this was contest mode. Dealing enough damage and surviving with limited revives through rotations was really tough, and meant that some teams spent hours upon hours trying to clear this encounter, especially with an aggressive enrage mechanic present to wipe teams who failed to damage the boss quickly enough.
Wait for your big shot. What? Are you kidding me?
What?
Are you kidding me?
What? Why?
In the middle of our damage phase. Like, why? I don't understand.
Must be a total time thing.
You guys know that putting on the suit for Dungeon Zone meant squeezing into some tight clothes, and every big guy, self included, knows that it comes with a lot of nerves to look good and feel confident. Over my years, I've struggled with weight, whether it was stress, portion control, timely management, or just forgetting that calories do in fact add up. Over my years, I have dropped over 100 pounds, but that journey isn't over. As someone with weight issues knows very well, it's never over. Thankfully, I have a craving for Factor. Factor makes chef-ready meals in just 2 minutes and caters diets to your specific needs without compromising your health. I love Factor because it saves me all the hassle of thinking about what I need to cook, and it stops me from overspending on takeout. Plus, the meals are just really good. It's thanks to companies like Factor that I feel like my best self comes out on these days. So please consider giving it a try and supporting yourself with my code EvanFeb50 for 50% off your first order of Factor 75. I'm proud of everyone who gives themselves a chance to be healthy. There was a final unfortunate piece to the puzzle that made damage so difficult for those in contest mode. The community would later find out when they were dealing critical damage to the Shrieker bosses. It was actually only base damage being received. This explained why weapons players thought would be meta, like the newly buffed Queenbreaker's bow, felt so terrible, and why off-meta options like Sleeper Simulant managed to find their way into the loadouts of many. The ultimate loadout here was Anarchy and snipers, since Anarchy works on projectile ticks of damage with 2 shots per target working. It just so happens that there are 4 targets that share a health bar here, so Anarchy was able to wield damage, and snipers like Supremacy with rewind rounds and kinetic tremors, for example, could sustain damage. You would need to sustain it, since this is one of the longest damage phases in Destiny history, clocking in at approximately 1 minute and 20 seconds of damage, only being beaten by Golgoroth, Kel Echo, and the Corrupted Puppeteer. It's definitely the longest uninterrupted damage phase ever. Ammo would also become a scarce resource in this encounter, because the boss was so tanky, the ads were so dense, and the means to acquire it felt a bit one note and off. As Glad would point in his tweet on the matter, ammo being a necessity is something racers are taking into account. 2 hours and 7 minutes into the launch of the dungeon, we heard reports that a team had cleared the encounter, and to our surprise, it was true. Biggs NA, Mario Monkey, and Luigi Style were the first to conquer the spooky Shriekers and progress onto the final boss. This team later admitted that they had seen someone switch to the Anarchy strat, and they figured they would try it, proving the fact that streaming your run can certainly provide others with an advantage in their own runs. Interestingly though, this team did not fully understand the effects each symbol provided. After their completion, Luigi let me know that they understood the effect of the kill symbol and how it could be used to initiate DPS, but were unaware that the other symbols had their own meanings. As racers advanced through the winding mazes, waterfalls, drops, and just more trickery, they may have noticed something about this sunken pyramid. Worms. Like, everywhere.
Dude, look at this dead skin of the worm. Ew. Red skin of the worm.
We were first hinted at the possibility of worms playing a factor in this dungeon with the emblems for both the normal clear and the emblem for watching Dungeon Zone that viewers could get on Twitch. Now, with the husks of these worms, was it possible that one of Rolk's experiments was creating a new abomination of a worm? Was there a chance that Zol's old sunset model could find itself in the next encounter? Only time would tell. While this tricky dungeon was in full swing, it is important to reflect on just how far we had come. Root of Nightmares was only 2 years old at this point, and since its poor reception, Bungie have truly been on a generational run of day one raids and dungeons. Less than 10 minutes after Biggs and the Super Mario Brothers cleared Encounter 2, Team Indebted also progressed past the Shriekers. For keen Destiny players, Team Indebted is a name somewhat fresh in the memory, as they would be the team who claimed World's First in Destiny's previous race, Vesper's Host. From this moment, a real David versus Goliath story began to take shape. Biggs, Mario, and Luigi were not complete nobodies, with all three being talented Destiny players, especially in the world of challenges and lowmans. However, none of them had the World's First credentials of Team Indebted, and viewers began to wonder whether it would be 2 in a row for Indebted or a first for Biggs, Mario, and Luigi. A 10-minute head start in an encounter is no negligible advantage, with plenty of World's First races having a similar amount of time between completions. However, the Sundered Doctrine's boss would act as a great equalizer for teams, as my co-host CB Gray pointed out. As with the second encounter, teams would really struggle to decipher the boss's mechanic, and teams were unable to disable the boss's shield to deal damage. This struggle allowed a large number of teams to catch up and rejoin the World's First lead. No dungeon encounter in the history of Destiny had ever tricked players in this way. While it's not uncommon for it to take hours to discover raid DPS mechanics, Sundered Doctrine was not a raid, and dungeons tend to focus more so on perfect execution to complete rather than pure puzzle solving. For example, the boss of Vesper's Host was mechanically much simpler, and it was the difficulty of surviving in the boss room that tripped up players. Team Indebted had proved they could execute well in Vesper's Host, but this was testing an entirely new set of skills in the puzzle solving. For the next 2 hours, teams continued to theorycraft, with ATP even taking to Microsoft Paint to test his theories. Despite this, no matter how hard teams tried, no one could keep Karev's shield down, and it would continue to regenerate and protect the boss's health. In this theory crafting period, the length of the Sundered Doctrine World's First officially became the longest dungeon race of all time, surpassing the 4 hours and 23-minute mark that it took to conquer Vesper's Host, as well as Wrath of the Machine, Eater of Worlds, Scourge of the Past, Vogue Reprisal Raid, and Root of Nightmares. 12 minutes later, the Doctrine's race also surpassed some of the more fan-favorite races that I was even shocked to find out about.
We will be passing Crown of Sorrows in 4 minutes.
That's crazy.
4 minutes. This will be longer than Crown. And Crown of Sorrows was brutal.
That
I know that 4 hours doesn't quite really reflect how brutal it was, but despite it being cleared in 4 hours and 40 minutes, Crown was brutal.
Crown was brutal.
The longer the race went on, the higher the stakes got, as it was inevitable that once the mechanic had been discovered, that it would be a flat-out race of execution for the World's First title. Yet even 5 hours after release, no team had figured out how to cook the boss, until, well, one team cooked the boss.
Here we go, guys. I would say we are officially on World's First watch. All right, do they hide now, or they get?
They hide. They hide. Oh my God!
Hey, we are officially
right back.
Yes, we are officially on watch.
Okay.
Everybody, lock
all
in.
right,
Here we go.
we're on watch.
Yes, you saw that right. To melt the boss's shield, you literally had to melt the boss's shield. And this really just added to the theme of what was easily the trickiest dungeon in Destiny history. Biggs' team realized that they needed to use empowerment to remove the strands holding the lens in place, and once the Truth Bearer had dropped a symbol, all matching symbols on that side needed to be removed, while all the symbols on the opposite side needed to be activated. Biggs, Mario, and Luigi had unlocked the secret to defeating Bowser, but in doing so, had unlocked it for ATP, Saltagreppo, Indebted, and the rest of the Destiny community. The World's First title would now be down to execution alone. Biggs' team were the first to deal significant damage to the boss 5 hours into the race, but ATP's team were hot on their trail, dealing huge damage just over 90 seconds later. As we mentioned, however, execution was going to decide this race, and ATP just fell short in this department, wiping shortly after their big damage. Biggs' team held strong and passed through a second damage phase, however, but this put the race in a critical period as they were so close to kill and world's first victory. Yet a wipe would have placed another team chasing in the lead, and it all came down to one moment.
That well is so important just to survive. You can always get another well.
Yes.
Oh! No! Oh my god. Oh my god.
Okay, good. Here we go. We're still in it. We're still in it. Chat, lock in.
After surviving this scare, nothing but one final damage phase stood between them and a maiden world's first title, and it went like this.
Reload that rocket.
Come on!
Throw it. Keep running away, scared. They got the boss on the ropes.
Correct
Make
is
it
finishing.
finishing. You can
Make your
Don't let him run. Reload that
Yes!
rocket.
In the words of Biggs himself, today was indeed the day, and the theme of Luigi's slaying giant bosses would continue into 2025. I spoke to the team right after their title was confirmed first by Bungie, and they had this to say.
I'm extremely happy with how well we managed to execute, because pretty much the moment we figured out how to get the damage, we pretty much just cleared it right away, and I'm extremely happy with that.
Yeah, no, during that last phase, there was like a couple close moments where I didn't almost die, and so I was also terrified of the fact that, you know, there's a chance that we could be sitting there trying to farm ammo and some team is like right behind us and already has ammo and going into that phase.
And this is now the second dungeon in a row, because Evan and I, when we casted Vespers as well, the second, and we'll see if it's the trend with the next one, but every time, you know, there's this breakthrough when you've learned how it works, and the team that's won gets to their first like significant damage phase. It's been cleared right after.
I'm very happy with that. It was a little bit more sus for me once we actually started playing on a real build, because I had to swap off Prismatic Warlock. That made the encounter super easy, but I had to swap back to Solar to give the well for the team.
Oh my
and
god.
that made playing it a bit harder.
Wait, so you're telling me that right when you figured it out, right when that aha moment happened, it was, okay, now let me put on an entire new loadout and then first try it?
Yeah, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh
because
my
what we were
God.
doing up until then is we were just running on like machine gun loadouts, just like prismatic, survival, kill everything, all that stuff. We didn't spec into boss damage at all. And then the moment we figured it out, we're like, okay, put on the actual loadouts.
Just 11 minutes after the first completion, 2 more teams would complete the dungeon in quick succession. Salta Greppo's team and the team of Hayes, Fox, and Limzo would finish within seconds of each other, but Salt's overly eager orbit meant that their official completion time was not included on the leaderboard. The quick succession of completions after once again showed just how important the Well of Radiance clutch was from Biggs, as well as the 10-minute head start they got on the boss after being the first to complete Encounter 2. The blurring controversy that manifested before the race could really not have played out in a more poetic way for the Doctrine's finale. Biggs had not blurred or blacked his screen out at any point, even at the points where he was clearly in the lead, and still claim victory. You may think that this has dispelled the myth that blurring harms your chances at World's First, but it really couldn't be more of the opposite, and I think the result of Sundered Doctrine race will unfortunately mean we will see more and more screen hiding in the future, and the information supporting this theory is truly damning. Biggs' team were the first to expose the secret to depleting the shield of the boss, and their final kill took around 14 minutes in total. With just 11 minutes separating first and second, if Biggs wiped towards the end of this fight and had to go through another 14-minute fight, they would have lost the title, while only 11 minutes separated first and second. Had they wiped twice more and taken 26 minutes extra, their place in the race would have dropped them from first to outside of the top 20. Karev was a relatively easy boss to DPS execute, and his entire defense was the puzzle in depleting his shield. Therefore, Biggs not blurring his screen truly allowed the floodgates to open. Had he been blurring his screen, however, Biggs would have had extra insurance if they had failed to execute and wiped. While streaming with no blurs was without a doubt a disadvantage for Biggs and his team, one could argue it made the race more exciting. As viewers, we love a raid and dungeon to be a nail-biter. We love it when the best teams are neck and neck with each other, and it's teams streaming to expose the mechanics that allow these suspenseful moments to happen. Of course, it sucks to have your strategies and puzzle-solving work stolen, but this is an inevitable compromise when you're taking advantage of the increased world's first race hype. At the end of the day, it all comes down to what people want raids and dungeon races to truly be. If they want an ultra competitive and fair race that solely focuses on the team with the best puzzle solving and execution method, then it's fine to embrace the idea of blacking and blurring screens to maintain full competitive integrity. However, if people want it to be a viewing spectacle the average player can get hyped for, the racers have to accept that they will surrender some competitive advantage if they choose to stream. There is no perfect solution, but all I will say is that world's first races are what they are, mostly due to the viewers who tune in and watch them. Thank you for watching.